Good afternoon, everyone. These have been a difficult couple of months for our city, but nothing truly compared to the lifetime of anxiety, concern, and legitimate fear that people of color in our community and across this country live with every day. To those who have marched in our streets over the last many weeks demanding change, I've been listening. To those who have called my office and emailed your concerns and ideas, thank you for sharing and engaging with us in this effort. And to our Salt Lake City Police Department and hundreds of police officers who have engaged with us, thank you for working with me to effect the changes that we're about to announce today. Your safety and the safety of all our residents is paramount in this work. Every community deserves law enforcement that serves and protects all of our families. I believe that. Chief Brown believes that. To that end, we are committed to making meaningful institutional changes to the way that our city is policed, reforms that build trust and operate on transparency. The people of this community deserve a city that is equitable for all who reside here. Today we're taking another step in our commitment to making the Salt Lake City Police Department the most well-trained and progressive police department in the country. Some department policies have already been updated, and the Salt Lake City Commission on Racial Equity in Policing will soon begin a broad review and recommend changes to our department's policies, budget, and culture. But there are some policy reforms that can and should be made without any further delay. This afternoon, I signed an executive order that directs Salt Lake City Police Chief Mike Brown to make 7 reforms to the policies of officers' use of force, body-worn cameras, and search and seizure policies by September 5th, 2020. My priority is that these reforms improve officer safety and public safety, which is a balance we have worked collaboratively to achieve. We'll start with the use of force. First, our use of force policy will go beyond the current constitutional floor of Graham versus Connor, which has long required an officer's use of force to be only objectively reasonable under the Fourth Amendment. While our policy currently requires that an officer find it reasonable to believe that a person will use a weapon to harm someone, an officer must now determine that deadly force is necessary and that the threat of death or serious bodily injury is imminent. Necessary and imminent will be carefully defined in our new policy. Second, officers will now be required to use de-escalation techniques before use of force. De-escalation tactics are no longer suggested or preferred. They are mandatory prior to using force to effect an arrest unless it would be unreasonable to do so. Officers will employ effective communication techniques in an attempt to achieve voluntary compliance. It's expected that our officers shall not contribute to a situation that could lead to use of force by taking unnecessarily or overly aggressive action. Third, we're also banning the use of deadly force to prevent an individual from self-harming where the individual is not an immediate threat to others. Fourth, while we have long had a policy requiring officers to intercede if they observed an improper use of force, we are now expecting our officers to do more. Any officer who reasonably believes that another officer is about to use force or other action that is illegal, excessive, or otherwise inconsistent with policy must, absent extraordinary circumstances, do whatever they can to interrupt the flow of events and prevent the use of force. Fifth, officers will include more detail in reports of use of force, including use of de-escalation tactics and every use of force, not just when use of force results in bodily injury. These will all be reviewed by 2 levels of supervisors. This creates greater transparency and accountability on use of force in our department. Now moving on to body-worn cameras. While our body-worn camera policy must follow the minimums in state code, my executive order instructs the Salt Lake City Police Department to update its body-worn camera policy to ensure discipline of officers for intentionally or negligently failing to activate their cameras. Because this change involves potential disciplinary action, the city's memorandum of understanding with the police union requires us to allow the union 30 days to consider and comment on it before enactment, thus the September 5th implementation. And finally, on search and seizure policies, my executive order today requires Salt Lake City Police Department officers conducting searches of real property or a vehicle without a warrant to inform the person being searched of their right to refuse and obtain a signature of the person consenting on the SLCPD consent to search form, which will now be updated to be easier to understand, translated into the languages most commonly spoken in our city. Right now, that form is effectively only available in English. These 7 reforms are the beginning of our work, not the end. I hope and I expect that we will see additional reforms in the coming weeks and months. I want to thank Chief Brown and the Salt Lake City Police Department for collaborating with me on these reforms. I know that we have a long road ahead of us in this journey toward equity, and I thank you and your department for your professionalism, your desire to innovate and grow, and your commitment to doing what's right for our residents. I also want to thank the members of the Commission on Racial Equity in Policing. You've convened an incredible group of community members to undertake this work, and I look forward to the outcomes of your reviews, and I trust that you'll also review these updates that I'm directing today to determine whether they represent the needs of our city residents and if we can do better. And lastly, I want to thank the people who have demanded for us to make systemic change. As a younger person, protesting was the path that I took when I wanted to see change, and it led me to policy making. Let's continue on this path of progress as a community that is united. The steps we're taking today are the right ones for a more just and equitable capital city. And honestly, I hope that other cities will look at these same reforms as they consider improvements across the state of Utah. Thank you for being here today. I'm going to turn the time over to Chief Brown.
Thank you, Mayor Manuel. Thank you for your leadership. We have looked at model policies from around the country with the intent of finding the best way Salt Lake City Police Department can conduct its business. Some of these policy revisions reflect national best practices. Others will be seen as a new gold standard of policing, with Salt Lake City Police Department leading the way. We do that because we are the premier agency in this state and the country, because we always look for ways to do it better. Sometimes those changes come from officers on the street. Sometimes they come through our training, best practices taught around the country. Other times they come from the community we serve. But honestly, this is not a radical shift for us. Many of these challenges we understand to be best practices. We've always held change and evolution as a pillar of our training, and that is why we are the best department with the most opportunities. These new policies aren't just about ink on paper. We will take the time necessary to ensure the department reads them, that they understand them, and most importantly, that we train to these changes, as we do with all policies. There's not one officer in this department who doesn't want to be the best in this profession. I know they come to work every day and they bring their A game because we have seen their professionalism and their character. We are sworn to obey, to support, and defend the Constitution of this country and this state, and we will continue to do so. We are an outstanding organization, and I challenge anyone to do it better than the Salt Lake City Police Department. Thank you.